All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining as always. Today, I'm very excited to talk with a Mr. Eric Bergman. And it turns out Eric Bergman's actually a pretty popular name, and you probably have not heard of this one, but this is my favorite Eric Bergman. We do know each other in real life, and he was kind enough to give me a copy of his book, Five Steps to Conquer Death by PowerPoint. I think before it was even published in 2012, and it turned out to be a very influential book for me. Even though it's called Death by PowerPoint, and I had really never had anything to do with PowerPoints, I really didn't even think that it would be relevant to my life at all, but turned out to be very influential on me, as I did end up becoming somewhat of a professional speaker here, but all through my sales career as well at the same time. Like this came in super handy, even just in real life encounters, because I didn't really know how to speak at all, especially with people of power, people in academia and stuff. There's no way I would have been confident going up and speaking to any of them. But it was those conversations that got me the biggest opportunities in my life. And it was some of these tips in this book that I kept with me. Before I'll hand it over to you, Eric, just lay a little bit of a groundwork here. I've read a lot of communication books. A lot of them I find either completely useless, completely irrelevant, or they fill my head full of rules that I can't remember. And you mentioned some of these, like body language, your body language, their body language. And I think the worst is neuro-linguistic programming, where you're supposed to identify your audience if they're a visual learner or auditory learner or tactile learner. A lot of people seem to think like that's the way to go, and yet I have no idea how to apply that in real life. I have no ability to determine if you're an auditory learner or anything, even on a one-on-one conversation. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you if I'm an auditory or tactile learner or whatever. It just never made sense to me. I can't be bothered to think about my body language or your body language or anything like that. I can really only think of delivering the information effectively. So we are going to jump in, but for people who are listening who are not in any type of sales or any type of speaking, I think this is still 100% relevant. I would say that most of the Nobel Prize winners out there were actually very good salespeople and therefore good communicators. And that's the reason that you heard their name, regardless of what career they're in. Could even be sports and everything. The person who can sell themselves better and communicate better is probably going to get ahead. It's going to make up even for lack of academic or athletic ability. I think if you can step in and communicate better, it's probably going to get you ahead. And if you have all the skills in the world, but you can't hold a conversation, you can't sell yourself to your bosses or your peers or your audience, then nothing's probably going to happen in your career.
I couldn't agree more. It's lovely to see you. We had a relationship years ago, and as we've discovered, you went to school with our daughter, interestingly enough, which I don't even think we knew when you worked at the gym you worked at before into 2012 before I sent the book to you, before you left there and went to Europe and I sent you the book. Do you want to know a bit about me and how I ended up getting to where I am right now?
Yeah, who are you and why should we listen to you about this?
Well, I started my communications career on June the 14th, 1982, about minus 7 years before you were born, I'm guessing, if you're about
Yes.
Chrissy's age. And I started as a public affairs officer with the government of Alberta in Edmonton, Alberta, when the unemployment rate in Edmonton was 17.5%.
Hard times.
Now, it was very hard times. Fortunately, I was president of the Students Association at the college I went to, which is this college here, Grant MacEwan College. And we drank B-52s with the Minister of Advanced Education and Manpower. And at our final event at the Petroleum Club in Calgary, I said, gee, if an opening comes up in your communication office, please let me know. And that's how my career started, actually, was I got a call, and long story short, I ended up working there. And I actually worked for government for 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days, just
Okay.
by coincidence.
Not a Freemason, huh?
No, not a Freemason, but it was the 333. And I have been self-employed since September the 17th, 1985.
I love the exactitude.
I have a thing for dates, in case you haven't noticed. In March 1987, I packed all my worldly possessions and moved to Toronto, drove to Toronto. For those of you who don't know how far Edmonton is from Toronto, it's 3,600 kilometers. And I set up shop here as a freelance writer. I took on a partner. We had a couple of employees, and at one point we talked about changing to speech writing and doing speech writing exclusively, which you can do in Toronto because there are enough head offices and there are enough executives. You can't really do that in other places in Canada or in a lot of other markets around the world, actually. Toronto seems to be very unique that way. And from speech writing, training became a natural extension. And I was like you. I thought, I'm hearing all these rules, I'm hearing all these things. My grandfather used to have a number of great sayings, and one of them was common sense is perhaps the least common commodity on the planet. So, what I wanted to do was develop a way of approaching presentations that was natural, that was based in common sense, and it was supported by the research. And that's pretty much how I made my living for many years, both presentation skills training on one side and media training on the other. And it's what fed our family, put our kids through university, and financed the retirement I'm just starting to enjoy at this point in my life.
And I'm pulling you out of it for a couple of hours.
That's
Um,
okay.
so we would think that these people, these CEOs and higher ups in huge company corporate offices in Toronto, you would think that they know their subject enough to communicate it. Why would they need someone like you?
Because everybody takes communication for granted. Everybody seems to think that if I beat you over the head long enough and loud enough with a key message, that you're going to do what it is I want you to do. And one of the things I have to teach my clients, and I've had to work with in my colleagues in the global communication practice, and on the volunteer side of my life, I've sat on many international committees that are communication based, is teach people that communicating is not about what you say, but it's about what comes back. And that you give people ideas with the intent of getting something back, a behavioral or an attitudinal outcome. And probably the best way I've learned to describe that is, I don't know if you know our son, Andrew. I know you know Chrissy, but did you ever know Andrew or?
Only I saw him come into the gym with you a couple of times when he was home
Okay.
from school.
Yeah, so exactly. So first year he comes home from the University of Western Ontario. And every kid in Ontario and every kid in the Western world, as you know, knows that you want to save the planet. Save the planet is a good thing, and you have to turn lights off to reduce electricity to save the planet. So Andrew comes home from his first year at Western. I go upstairs in our house. The light's on in his room, it's on in the bathroom, it's on in the hallway, it's on in his sister's room for some unknown reason. And he's downstairs sitting on the couch eating a bowl of cereal, watching sports something on television. And I'm thinking to myself, can't you just turn the light off? And I keep thinking, well, that's a key message. Turn the light off is a great key message.
It's
There's no
very simple
reason.
too.
Exactly. There's no reason why they shouldn't understand it. But then I chastised myself and said, you're a professional communicator. You're interested in the outcome. And the outcome I wanted was for him to turn the light off without me having to tell him to do it. And sometimes you have to change your input to get the anticipated outcome that you're hoping to get. So I stood at the top of the stairs and I said, Andrew, could you please come up and turn off the light? To which he replied, but you're upstairs, Dad. To which I replied, but I'm not the one who left the lights on. So he had to put down his cereal bowl, unwrap his 6'7" frame from in front of the television, walk up the stairs, turn off the lights, and then walk back down the stairs. And it only took twice for him to completely change his behavior forever. So every year after, every time after that, every year after that, he has been fantastic at turning the lights off, to the point that years and years later, in fact, about 6 or 7 years ago, he was living with his girlfriend at her parents'. And we all went out for dinner one night, and I said to her mom, to Brittany's mom, I said, how's living with the big guy? And she said, oh, it's awesome. Never met somebody who turns off lights like him. But if I could just get him to put the bloody coffee maker back underneath the cupboard when he makes a pot of coffee, everything would be perfect. But I said, well, would you like some insight on how to do that? She said, sure. So I said to her, don't do it yourself. Have him get up and do it. And I bet it won't take very long. And about a week later, I get a text from Andrew saying, you're such a jerk, Dad. Because she tried it and it worked. So when you ask me, why do these executives need to understand how to communicate effectively, is because every executive I've ever met on the planet, and I had this conversation with an executive, a CEO on Tuesday, has to get people to do things to support the business. That every interaction should be a meaningful interaction in which the business objectives, the executive's objectives, hopefully they're in sync, are advanced, whether you're talking to one person or 1,000 within your organization or externally. To do that, you have to understand that it's not about what goes in, it's about the anticipated outcome that you're seeking, and all of your activity should be focused on that. And that's why strategic communication is so important to executives.
So this differs pretty big time from like entertainment because there's a goal here. We want the audience to take action, to take some action.
Yeah, there's no reason why it can't be entertaining sometimes. So Tuesday night, I went to watch a bunch of venture capital uh, presentations for a group of angel investors. And my client was one of 3 groups that were presenting. And they were all entertaining. And there is a time and a place for that. I did media training in New York, and one of the people said to me, aren't you going to tell us to smile? I said, smile? Why? Well, our last media trainer said we should always smile whenever we're dealing with the media. So I put on a smile on my face and I said, I'm here to tell you that we're only going to lay off half of you. There's a time and a place that's appropriate for everything. Entertainment value or no entertainment value, the communication process has to feed into, and when you're talking to people, how people listen. And the last thing that PowerPoint does is feed into that. In fact, the research is absolutely clear. It takes away from their ability to listen.
So before we jump right into PowerPoint, it's been 12 years since we last saw each other. It's been 12 years since the book came out. The world has changed quite a bit. Back in 2012, the cool guys still had Blackberries. They were just starting to get smartphones. I was not one of those cool people. Didn't have any of these things. And it's definitely changed the way that we communicate. Is this problem still relevant?
Absolutely. I don't care if it's 12 years since you had a smartphone. What goes on between these 2 big ears here, according to cognitive scientists, hasn't altered one iota in 50,000 years. So the way that we take in information as human beings has not changed, even though we have all of these different ways to theoretically try to communicate with others.
So what's so bad about PowerPoint? What's your problem here?
It overloads working memory and decreases the audience's ability to hear or read what is said.
So that's also transferable to other media.
Yes, yes. So one of the questions I asked my client on Tuesday is, do you ever watch Dragon's Den? Oh yeah, all the time, because he's got an idea that he's trying to generate capital for. How many slides have you seen on Dragon's Den?
Probably
Not
not
one.
very many.
And do you
They,
know why?
they might just have their business name up or their logo or something projected up.
If that. But the reason is because people will change the channel and disappear. Now, just because you've got a bunch of people in a room, in a closed room, and they're too polite to get up and go, doesn't mean that they're going to disappear as well. They might be looking you right in the eye, but they might just be as disappeared as somebody changing the channel from Dragon's Den to some other show.
And they're thinking about dinner tonight or something.
Exactly. Their next vacation, the fight they had with their spouse, partner, significant other, it doesn't matter.
Anything they'd rather do than sit through a PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly. So, there's been a bunch of research done, and I've discovered a bunch of that research since the last time that we spoke. One piece that's in the book from John Sweller, who is a University of New South Wales in Australia, emeritus professor, and has been a mentor of mine. He discovered in about 2007 that when people attempt to read and listen at the same time, they understand and retain less than if they do either activity separately.
I think we need to repeat that. You can't do two things at once.
Well, you can if one of them is a repeatable, simple thing for which you've created a cognitive script, but otherwise, no. So, you see on a cooking show the chef going and talking away. Well, when I'm cutting onions, I don't talk because I like my fingers to be the same size coming out of that exercise they were going in. So the chef has created a cognitive script, and that's what they use. But if anything happens, if they hit a piece, if they hit a rock in the onion, or if you're driving down the freeway and everything's good, you can talk on your phone. But if something happens in front of you, you have a choice. You can focus on what's in front of you and save your life, or you can keep carrying on the conversation and have a problem.
And I think that's one of my favorite things about audios in general is that you can do it while you're doing something that you already have a script for, like gardening, or up here, the ladies love to knit out in the country, so they can knit and they can listen. And yeah, it's no problem. I'm not going to be able to knit and listen because I don't know how to knit. I'm going to have to pay attention to what I'm doing.
Exactly. So with Sweller's research in mind, it's better, a lot of university courses, you go and the teacher delivers or professor delivers PowerPoint and talks. It's better to read the PowerPoint in advance or later, turn your back on the professor and sit and listen to what they're saying and take notes rather than attempting to read the slides and listen to the professor at the same time, because Sweller demonstrated clearly through his research that it was impossible to do both at the same time and do them well.
I even have a hard time when the words on the screen are exactly what the speaker is saying.
Well, because you can read two or three times faster than I can talk. And if I try to talk that fast, then there's no opportunity for ideas to make it to my long-term memory. So since that book came out, my thinking has evolved. And I've come to realize that the only reason for bringing people together in any type of presentation is to listen to somebody share something of value. Otherwise, send me the document and I'll read it, and I'll read it a lot faster than you can ever talk about it. So with that in mind, how important is listening? It's critical. How important is it to understand how the audience listens if you want to be even remotely successful? It's you can't remove it from the process. So listening involves both working memory and long-term memory. And working memory is very, very small, at maximum of 20 words, absolute maximum. One of the ways I demonstrate that is I play a game called Broken Telephone, where I whisper a phrase in one person's ear and it's got to go through 5 or 6 people, and the last person has to tell us what the phrase is. And I always time how long it takes because there's no time in the world. And the first phrase I use is Mary had a little lamb. And it goes through and comes out as perfect as it went in. Mary had a little lamb. Everybody has a good joke. And then I ask them, are all of your issues as simple as Mary and her lamb? Well, of course not. So the second phrase I use, and I tell them it bears no resemblance to Mary or her lamb, is Pentium chips operate with titanium coprocessors.
Wow. I
How
already
often does
forgot that.
Exactly. And what happens is, in listening, you have to give a bit of information to somebody who has to take it into working memory. Then working memory has to go to long-term memory to either find or create a space for that idea. And then you have to come back and nod and say, okay, I can take more into working memory. What happens with PowerPoint is it overloads working memory and nothing makes it to the long-term framework.
I notice this a lot with video essays on YouTube. I like to watch them mostly for entertainment, just so I'm not watching pure junk. But I find myself remembering almost nothing about them. Almost any. I've watched probably hundreds of them at this point, and I can barely remember any details. I can remember sort of the gist, the feelings that I was left with, especially about the subject being talked about. But remembering any of those details is a real challenge.
Well, and part of that also is the concept that this, what we're doing right now, has been a storytelling medium since humans first walked erect.
Just speaking to each other.
Yes, the best way to have people remember is shape a story around what it is you want them to remember. The better you do that, the more effectively you can help them embrace the ideas you're talking about.
So do you think there's a fundamental problem with visual learning formats? Is that one of the core problems of PowerPoint?
I think there's a fundamental problem with not understanding that the best way to communicate is to separate the written word from the spoken word, period. You know, as a salesperson, you would know that if you put a document in front of your client and they drop their head to read it, the best thing you can do is stop talking. Doesn't matter how long it takes, doesn't matter how uncomfortable you feel, doesn't matter how you feel, because if they don't get it, it hasn't worked.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that, everybody forgets about modern presentations is that if the audience doesn't get it, they are the most important people in the room. If they don't get it, it's been a complete and total waste of everybody's time.
And I think we can go back in history and see very clearly that we never needed visual aids to communicate effectively. Like whoever was going around trying to create a revolution against the British or whatever, I'm sure they did use written words, pamphlets, and then the rest of it was 100% spoken.
Well, and you can use visual aids. So I did a presentation at a town hall for a counselor here in Toronto. I belong to a lawn bowling club and I'm on the board of the club. And I took a bowl and I took a jack. And that was my visual aid. And I said to everybody, does anybody know what this is? And they all said it was a ball. And I said, no, 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 no. It's a bowl, not a ball. And we bowl the bowls down the rink. And can anybody tell me what this bowl has in common with human beings? Everybody's kind of, well, it's round. It's got no, it has a bias. And a bias enables the bowl to go one direction or another. And this young woman, young girl who was at the meeting with her parents put her hand up and said, "What's a bias?" I said, "Well, with a bowl, it's a weight that makes the bowl go one direction or another, like much like a curling stone once you put the spin on it. When it comes to a bias in humans, I'm going to let your parents describe that one to you." And everybody laughed. And, I bet you there are people now, 2 months later, 3 months later, who could remember that joke, or if I even twigged them a little bit, would go, "Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that was interesting. The bowl turns in one direction or another, doesn't it?" And you can't buy that kind of implanting in people's heads. You have to set about to consciously to do it.
There are conversations I remember from being like 6 years old and stuff, and just a few key words that they always stuck with me. And yet, back to videos, I can't remember often the video that was released last week. These 5-minute quick videos, and everything goes so fast, and there's visuals and there's jokes, and I remember being entertained, but I really don't remember the video.
Well, exactly. And you're hitting on another point is that I believe every presentation should be a conversation. A structured conversation with a direction, a call to action, and an anticipated outcome that you want the audience to do or not do, but a conversation nonetheless.
So, you've got 5 steps here to
Mhm.
fix this problem and to improve our communication, whether we're using a presentation or not. I think these rules absolutely do apply. So, step one is put the audience first. What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to understand who it is you're talking to, both on the basis of who they are on the outside and what motivates them on the inside. So, whenever we talk about demographic characteristics, we're talking about exterior of the human being that you're talking to. age, gender, ethnocultural outcome, how much money do you make, what kind of car do you drive, what kind of house do you live in, do you have a spouse, partner, significant other, do you have dependents? All of that is external characteristics. Grouping audiences according to those characteristics is one way to look at audiences, but it's not the only way. Communication research also tells us that you can group people according to their shared opinion towards an issue. And the more you understand that shared opinion, the better you can communicate with them and potentially influence them. And I don't believe enough people, especially those who use PowerPoint to develop their content, which I think is one of the biggest sins that's ever happened to the communication world, don't spend enough time understanding the motivation that exists with any audience at any given moment in time. So you really have to have a structured process for doing that, and you cannot bypass that step if you hope to be successful.
So when you say developing the presentation with PowerPoint, it's a leading question here. I know you have a system for actually developing the presentation. So how do we do it then if you don't just like we're starting from scratch here. I've got to present tomorrow on a new product. I'm familiar with the product. So instead of just pulling up PowerPoint and writing down some bullet points and trying to find some pictures or something or some graphs that are relevant, maybe a comparison to another product, you're saying forget all of that.
I am. The last thing you should do is develop your slides.
If
So
you're using slides.
if you're using slides, and I don't mind there's a few slides. I mean, a picture can tell 10,000 words, the actual Confucian quote, and I lost marks on an assignment once. A picture is worth 10,000 words. But a picture of 9 words is worth 9 words. It's actually worth less because nobody's going to remember the 9 words. So when I talk about structuring the conversation, I'm talking about evoking a set of critical thinking skills that will enable you to get to the very core of what is important to that audience at that moment in time. So we're actually doing a Venn diagram. These are all the things that are important to me. These are all the things that are important to them. And the intersecting point at that moment where the communication is going to take place is what's important. Okay. So when I started writing speeches many, many years ago, I would walk into an organization, I'd meet people around the table for the first time. They would say to me, we want to talk about this and this and this, and I would take all their ideas and I would go away and I would write a speech and I would hand it to them and they would say, well, this is lovely, it's beautifully written, but it's not what we want to say. And then we go back and forth. And the $1,500 I was supposed to get for the speech, I would end up making $4 or $5 an hour by the time the process was over, because there'd be so much back and forth. And I've never met a client who says, I got 1,500 or 2,500 or 3,000 or 5,000 for this speech. It's probably 5,000 now. If it takes longer, you're not going to be able to go to them as a speechwriter and say, well, it took a little longer, so can we make it 6,000? They'll say, no, 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 5,000 was the amount. So within the constraints of that money, I thought, ooh, it's much better for me to do this efficiently than inefficiently. So what I learned to do was push all of their information to one side and go to a whiteboard or flip chart and draw one horizontal box at the top of a whiteboard or flip chart or even a piece of paper and say, in one sentence, we're going to put down the main idea of what it is you're going to talk about. That sentence is going to contain the word how or why, because we're not here to dump data. We're here to share information, and how or why is a signal to them that that's what we're going to do. And it also will remind us that that's what we're supposed to do. And I wouldn't go any further until everybody agreed what was in that sentence, because there's no sense in me making it up because I'm wasting my time and my per hour rate is dropping accordingly.
So the idea, that's the sentence, and it's a complete sentence, not a bullet point sentence. It's a
That's correct.
complete thought. But then you fill it out with the how and the why.
So I'm here today to talk to you about why our innovative idea is going to disrupt the electric motor industry forever. And how you can take advantage of it as an investor and get in on the ground floor.
Very simple.
Exactly.
So the how and the why is part of the idea.
Yeah, I used both in that one. One should appear. Sometimes both will appear, but if neither one appears, you better be really careful about what it is you're doing.
Because why are we here as an audience?
Exactly.
Very few people are interesting enough just to drone on without a clear point.
Nobody's interesting enough to drone on without a clear point,
Yeah, I guess you're
especially
right.
in a business context. Nobody.
Even a comedian or something, they got to work their way to the punchline.
Exactly. And they work a lot harder on being succinct than most people who deliver PowerPoint presentations.
Fair enough. So I did work in a university for a time, and one of the worst parts was meetings. There's just so many meetings. And we always heard when I was growing up, we always heard that, technology has already been saving us time and everything. It's making our lives more efficient. And I was led to the idea that when I was an adult, which I am now an adult, that these technologies would save us an incredible amount of time and make everything more efficient. But it seems like every new tool we have just creates more time wasting ability.
Well, have you heard what Amazon has done, what Jeff Bezos has done with PowerPoint in his organization?
I have not
Banned it.
banned it.
Yeah. So what he's done is put in a systematic approach to separate the written word from the spoken word, which I believe has become part of their competitive advantage.
The worst thing I ever had to sit through was receiving a memo, reading the memo. I like to read. I will read the memo right away. Going to a meeting and reading the memo together, having the memo read to me in the meeting. What was the point of this?
Well, there is no point. So what Bezos does is you have a 6-page format maximum with which to present any idea that goes to a senior level management or the board. Uh, the beauty of the 6 pages, you better be, there can't be a wasted word in 6 pages. If you're seeking $500 million of investment for a new business idea, you can't waste a single word in that 6 pages.
Mhm.
So you take the time and go through the critical thinking process to get your ideas into a succinct and meaningful 6 pages. You share that with the group. When the meeting starts, they determine, has everybody read it? And if you haven't, they stop the meeting until everybody has. And if you've read it, which it sounds like you like to be prepared, then you get to do your email until I'm done reading it because I didn't have time to prepare. Once it's done, the person bringing the idea gets a couple of minutes to just very quickly outline what they're seeking, and everybody asks them questions.
You
And
said
then they
one
make a
minute?
decision. You get about 2 minutes, maybe a minute to just say, here's what we think is the opportunity, here's how much it's going to cost, here's what's going to be the benefit to us.
And jump right into questions.
Right into questions.
And you've got a pretty interesting approach to answering questions.
I do.
10 words or less, you say.
Well, yes. I mean, I've broken that here, but
Don't worry,
when
that's
you're,
another question, how to adapt this to podcasts where we're supposed to fill out an hour or two of talking.
well, you have to give a little more information, but when you're done talking, just stop and let the interviewer who does that for a living ask more questions. That's the basic one there. No, you ask people questions, and it was funny. I was watching these presentations on Tuesday night at the Angel Investors session, and somebody asked a closed question, and there were two PhDs at the front of the room for one of these, and the first PhD went on, and then the second PhD jumped in and went on, and there were no more questions. So you've used up all their time by going blah, 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 when the answer was actually yes.
Because it's closed. It's a yes or no answer.
Exactly. Exactly. So can I give you an example of questions and answers?
Yeah.
Okay, so just gonna have to just do this for 1 second. Do you drink coffee?
Yes.
How many cups a day?
One.
Always one?
Yes.
Why only one?
Second one makes me jittery in the afternoon, and I usually run out of time.
So when did you discover you were getting jittery?
As I started to get healthy, I could no longer drink 10 cups a day.
So how old were you when you started drinking coffee?
22.
Okay, so you never drank coffee in high school?
Nope.
Did you drink coffee at university?
Didn't go to university.
Okay. So what would you have studied at university if you'd gone?
You got me to where you wanted me to go. I thought of linguistics at one point, but I would probably choose something more practical.
Okay. So we started with do you drink coffee? We're now at what would you have studied at university if you'd attended, or what did you study at university? What are the odds you could predict we're going to go there?
Well, I think you could predict because you had a plan.
Of course. I've played this game 10,000 times. I always get there. How many questions did I ask you?
6, 7?
Did I ask both closed and open-ended questions?
Yes.
How long did it take?
Couldn't have been much longer than a minute.
38 seconds.
You timed it.
I did. That's why I started and stopped my stopwatch. So I asked, and it usually works out to about 10 questions per minute.
Which seems unreasonable if you just hear that you're expected to get
Oh,
a lot of questions done.
it sounds crazy. It sounds ridiculous. But the beauty of this is, and you talk about wanting to remember things down the road, right? I've played this game on the morning of day one of a 3-day training session, and asked everybody 2 days later what your answers were. And they get them, and they can remember them. When was the last time you went to a presentation and could remember diddly squat 2 days later?
Well, you made an important point in the book that if you're forced to think about your question or hold on to your question, they say, right? Hold the questions until the end.
Yep.
You are effectively competing your own voice in your head, reminding you of that question, repeating the question so you don't forget it. And that's drowning out. You're competing for the voice of the speaker.
Exactly. You're keeping your working memory clogged with the question you're trying to ask. And while you do that, you can't take anything else in to your working memory. So asking somebody to hang on to a question is, in fact, because human beings cannot listen and think at the same time, is like asking them to stop listening.
And that makes sense to me. I like to write down questions so I don't have to think about them. You can't always do that in a free-flowing conversation, though.
Well, you can. And if it wasn't a podcast, when I saw you writing down a question, as a general statement, I will stop talking.
Really?
Yeah. So I've seen you do that a couple of times, and I've toyed with it, and I thought, nah, I don't want to mess them up too much. But if I'm on a sales call and the client's writing something down, I shut up because they're not going to listen to me anyway. So what am I talking for? I'm not talking for them. I'm talking for me. And believe me, I've talked enough in my 65 years on the planet. I don't need to hear me talk anymore. Or my wife comes around the corner and says, oh my goodness, what an enlightened statement that was.
Yeah, fair. So I thought this was an important point as well. You did mention it in the book, but my translation of it is the audience doesn't care about you. They're not there for you. They're there for themselves. And that's especially true in my business of health and nutrition. By far, the majority of the people in the room who will show up have a health concern of their own, and they have
Yeah.
specific questions to ask. And it doesn't matter if I make some mistake, or as long as I don't look like a total bum and all that stuff. Like, it just, to me, doesn't really matter what I'm wearing, doesn't matter what my body language is. It matters if I'm able to communicate effectively and definitely answer their questions. The Q&A is
Yeah.
more important to me than the actual presentation. And in fact, on Instagram, almost our whole business model is doing only Q&As. There's no lecture. It's just straight up Q&As on the Instagram story, one after
Yep.
another, as many as I can
Yeah.
get.
Exactly. Everybody talks about engagement in a presentation. You want to get the audience engaged. Well, is there any better way to get the audience engaged than have them ask 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 questions? Now they're definitely engaged. The way most people answer questions is, well, I'm glad you asked that question. As a matter of fact, I do drink coffee. I generally drink 1 cup a day. In fact, it's definitely 1 cup a day. It's always 1 cup a day, and it never wavers from that. Because I discovered, as I got a little healthier, that if I'm drink more than one cup a day, I'm a little jittery in the afternoon. I don't really have time for it anyway. And I started drinking coffee a little later than most people I know. I didn't drink coffee in high school. It wasn't until I was about 22. And, you know, a lot of people start at university. I never went to university, but if I'd gone to, you see where I'm going with this?
You assumed the direction the questions would take.
Yeah, in other words, I'm going to read your mind. Is there anything more arrogant than that? It just blows me away.
I wonder if I could offer a minor defense here.
Of course.
In my business, I answer the same questions over and over and over, and I try to be creative and I try to switch it up, knowing that some people have listened to this for years and they've heard this answer 100 times. Is there
Yeah.
anything new I can, offer to it or whatever? But point here is that I usually can anticipate the next question, and often you can see like they submit the questions ahead of time, so I can see two or three questions in a row, and it usually is pretty predictable. But I see exactly what you're saying, that if I was on stage doing that and you asked me one question about wheat and I give you six different statements about wheat, I could easily talk for an hour about wheat. All you got to do is say wheat and I can go off. But how do I know that, their next question was actually just in a slightly different direction? Basically, I'm taking away the opportunity for other people to ask questions, or for that same person to get to the heart of what their question was, and I just
Uh,
assumed what it was.
you're getting right to I call it the enlightened stage of communication. Doesn't matter how many times you've heard the question, doesn't matter how many times you thought you've answered it. Um, it was a real moment for me in my life when I realized it's not about me, it's about them. And the more I can help them discover and the more I can help them understand, the better off we're both going to be at the end of the day. And then once I got to that stage, I started realizing that these assumptions I was making about where it was going were wrong more often than they were right. Because people will ask the same question to lead in, but then depending on where their cognitive framework goes, their experiences are, and where their life is, it can twist and turn in so many different directions. And once I started to get to that point, I, uh, I just loved answering questions, even if they were the same questions I heard at the last presentation I did, because I watch people's faces and they go, "Oh, wow," and that to me was so rewarding.
That's what got me over the hump. I always felt weird repeating myself. You kind of have this feeling, I don't know if other people have it, but I have this feeling like each speech has to be unique. And it always will be in some way. But yeah, we get a lot of the same questions. It was really a difficult thing to get used to, thinking like, oh, what if somebody listened last week and they heard me give this exact same answer? I mean, to me, that's good. That's consistent, but I also want to keep their attention. I don't want to be hit with the same information over and over.
But the beautiful thing is, if they heard it last week and they're back this week, then you've obviously gotten their attention. Like something you've done has gotten their attention, and reinforcing the answer is just going to reinforce what they already learned. And by keeping your answers short, you keep it way fresher.
I'm gonna try this the next time I do an Instagram story. Even I just finished reading this book for the third time, The 5 Steps to Conquer Death by PowerPoint. And the very next Instagram story I did, because we usually do them very regularly, I said, I'm just gonna do it by text. Every now and then I like to do it. I feel it forces me to have a simpler answer, and I can't just drone on. Now they only give me a 1 minute limit per clip, but very often I find myself just trying to use as much as that minute as I can. Like it is a simple question and it's a simple answer, and yet I'll speak for another 40 seconds pretty much unnecessarily, thinking that I'm getting more information into them.
Yeah, if you give them, so there's a pattern that occurs in face-to-face communication that I think you have to keep in mind whenever your answers get longer. And the pattern begins with I think. Thinking before talking is a good thing. I think most of us know. So I'm going to think about the idea that I'm going to express. Once I've thought about it, then I'm going to get that idea out. And as you know, having read the book, I'm a big believer in a nice, quick rate of word delivery. Our deputy PM, Krista Freeland, has not She is a believer in a slow rate of word delivery and drives me nuts. It's like you're talking down to people. Once you get that idea across, you have to pause to let them think about it. They have to take that idea, find a place for it in their long-term memory, and come back and nod and say, okay, I've got it. So if that 40 seconds beyond the answer to the question is filled up with blah, 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 they can't remember any of it anyway. But if it's filled up with 40 seconds of 3 ideas separated by pausing, then you have a chance of adding value to that answer.
Fair enough. And I want to get to the step 2. We've covered step 1 here, which is put your audience first. But you
Yep.
mentioned this word delivery thing, and I have personally slowed down my speech. When I first started speaking, a couple of people mentioned that they couldn't understand me, not just because I spoke quickly, but also because I'm from East Toronto and I spoke like an idiot, which the kids now, oh my goodness, it's bad. It's bad. We have our own language there, and it doesn't make sense to outsiders. And I had a lisp and a stutter. And if you speak too quickly, yeah, it's very hard for people to separate words sometimes, especially
Yes.
if English is not their first language. So we always use subtitles as well. But at the same time, I don't want to go too slow. And when I feel like I'm on a roll or I feel like an idea has been substantiated well enough, I do like to start spitballing and start to go quick. And I get a lot of good feedback that says, we really appreciated it. That segment that you ramped up there, oh, that was killer. It was entertaining and informing. So I agree. You don't have to speak so slow. And if you choose that
No.
as your default and always speak slow, it's so hard. And you know that person speaks slow now, so you're not going to want to go to that meeting or listen to that podcast or whatever.
Or watch the deputy prime minister when she's trying to do a news conference. Yes.
Yeah, my gosh. Even worse when it needs to be translated, which is not always a standard practice. But my
Yeah.
very first speech was translated live, and it was horrible. It was the worst experience I've ever had. And I broke a lot of these rules, even though I had already written your book. And that was later in 2012, I think. I did not put the audience first. I put myself first, right? There's a lot of people who say, I'm so nervous to speak. That's because you're thinking about yourself. You're not thinking about the audience and why they're there and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
in the case of this presentation, I knew for a fact that the audience didn't want to be there. It was a bunch of Chinese delegates. We had a relationship. This is in Sydney when I worked at the University of Sydney. We had a relationship with some Chinese universities as well. And so they sent
Yeah.
some delegates over. But thinking back now, I'm older, I'm more mature. I assumed that those Chinese delegates were just really looking forward to having a good time in Australia, seeing some animals, seeing some nightclubs and restaurants. And, they had to sit through a few of these lectures. So why would I bore them with all the details? And they gave me a half an hour and I'm panicking. Like, what do I do? I was there to talk about a very simple experiment that I had run and we had a little equation for it. It could have been explained in 5 minutes, no problem. But I tried to drag it out, and yeah, I don't know what my speech patterns were like because I was so nervous. But yeah, having it translated there too, and I'm sitting there impatient, sweating, waiting for them to translate, and then they're asking questions to the translator, and it was a bit of a mess. But I think if I just sat patient and realized that the only job I have here is to communicate one key idea actually to this audience here, and if it stopped in 2 minutes with one of them having a question, it probably would have finished the presentation because that one question was really all we needed to explain.
Well, and it's interesting because people talk about nervousness. Best way to reduce nervousness is encourage questions throughout your presentation and answer them. Because now it's gone from that formal presentation stuff to being a conversation.
And I find it very easy now. It's crazy how used to it I got, and I've seen other people as well, just super nervous, even to put their face on Instagram or something like that.
Yeah.
And after a little while, when you realize that you're just there to serve the audience, you're just a vessel. You have some information they want, and you just got to give it to them. I don't know, the
And
focus is off you.
exactly. And I think you alluded to this earlier. This is, and I tell the people this all the time, this is the most forgiving medium you'll ever experience. Conversations are jagged, they're rough, they start, they stop. People don't finish sentences in conversations. But because of that, it becomes very interactive. And again, you can make all kinds of mistakes. So the person I worked with on this week, his presentation, he forgot something, and he's at the front of the room, and there's all these angel investors. And he said right while he was there, "Oh, I can't remember," and then he moved on. Next day, I'm working with him because I'm doing some training with him, and he said, "Oh, I can't believe that happened." I said, "Look, if I went and talked to everybody in that room, not one of them would remember what you felt was the biggest faux pas you've had in a presentation or speech in decades. Not one will remember it. All they're going to remember is the story that you told and whether or not that story is important to them."
With those Chinese delegates in mind, reading your book, I was thinking how I would have started that presentation now. And I didn't have PowerPoint, by the way. I don't think it. I think I had a whiteboard, and I really only had to write the one equation on it and just explain very briefly about the purpose of the experiment and whatever. But I think now I would have opened, instead of just jumping into the presentation, panicking because I got to fill up half an hour with 5 minutes worth of content. I would have just talked to them. Hey, how you guys doing? How was the flight? How you enjoying Sydney so far? Did you get to go to the Opera House? You go to the beach? What's your favorite thing you saw here right now? Because just establishing that with them in this specific circumstance where I actually didn't need them to take action at all. There's no call to action here. It's just a little experiment. We're just here to tell you about it. You're going to hear some other lectures and stuff too. Now I feel that I should have just had a little conversation with them and then
Exactly.
given them my 5 minute explanation of the
Yeah,
experiment,
I'm
and
here
that's it.
today to talk to you about how we arrived at the results we did through the experiment that we conducted. And by the end of my conversation, I'm hoping you'll understand why we got the results we did and think about whether or not these results or the way this experiment was conducted would have any value to your business when you get back to your individual institution.
And this is similar to something you mentioned in the book. You were talking about a sales presentation over lunch or something, and one guy just scribbles some notes or a little diagram on a napkin, something that happens
Yeah,
very, very often. I've been through many conversations like that, and I still
yeah.
remember that napkin drawing. And in some cases, I kept it or took a little note of it myself, and that's all we needed. But then those same people go into the boardroom and they give that same 3 minute pitch over the course of 30 minutes, sweating the whole time, filling it up with useless comments and rambling. And yeah, it's amazing that it is so much more free flowing in conversational style. As soon as you try and make it into a presentation, everyone's bored.
Well, probably one of the most striking examples of that, which is part of what that story was about. I saw a presentation delivered by a portfolio manager for a mutual fund company. And this individual was going across the country talking to investment advisors and saying, "This is the fund we have," and used a flip chart and talked to them and answered questions and was incredibly successful. They had to close the fund 6 months after the roadshow because there was so much money going into the fund.
Wow.
Then the mutual fund company was bought by a bank, and the bank now has the capacity to increase the amount of money that can go into different funds, and this was one of them. And they sent the portfolio manager across Canada and talked to advisors, but the bank's got to have its bloody slides. So they never did fill it up. And it was horrible by comparison to the first one, because I attended both. It was horrible. It was mind-bogglingly different in so many ways. It just, it stunned even me. What's really important about all of that is the conversation is the key. When was the last time you went to a party and got stuck at the party with the person who talks nonstop? Has that ever happened to you?
One of the reasons I avoid parties.
Well, exactly. So the person talks nonstop. There's no pause between any ideas they express. They just keep going on and on. You can't listen, so you You're listening less. They see you're listening less. Do they talk less or talk more? They talk more. There's no pause anywhere. When you and your listeners leave this podcast, you're going to discover that most PowerPoint presentations are like getting stuck at the party with the person who talks nonstop. There isn't a pause to be found anywhere. It's impossible to listen to. So we give up and we start planning our vacation, going over a issue with our spouse, partner, significant other, or trying to figure out whether or not our investments are going to work this month, rather than listen to what the person's saying. I went to a presentation once where the person said, I got to get through 55 slides in 51 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
And I looked around the room in less than 2 minutes, and there's not one person even remotely paying any attention to this speaker at all. So that was before lunch. We had lunch, and then I had the afternoon with this group. And one of them said, so what you're basically telling us is that the presentation we saw this morning was a complete waste of time. Well, the people who presented in the morning were the ones paying my bill. So, well, I tell you, that got my heart rate up. So I paused and I thought about it and I said, you'll all get continuing education credits for attending this morning, correct? And they said, yeah. I said, well, then there was some value to it. And they came up to me after the presentation and said, that was well done.
And that's pretty incredible because quite a lot of modern life seems to be like that. A lot of things that are called training is you just sitting through a slide presentation, whether it's on, and now it's on Zoom, which to me is even worse for some reason. I don't know. There's no time constraints. I was at, I don't mean to bash this club that I'm a part of, but I'm a part of a club and they do a monthly meeting and I don't want to go to them because it should just be like, hey, how you doing? How you doing? You know, how was your month? Da, 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 da. Very quickly, we can talk about what we want to do, what the plans for the club is. But for some reason, it's a 30, 45-minute, 1 hour PowerPoint presentation. Why? I don't want to be here.
Yeah, well, I chaired the International Accreditation Council of the International Association of Business Communicators. First thing I did as chair was ban PowerPoint from our meetings. The pushback I got was phenomenal from people who know this is coming. Well, how would you not know me and not know that this is coming? But by the end of it, people were saying, I can't believe how much we get done at our meetings now. It's mind-boggling, the difference.
And before the meetings, it takes a long time to put together a presentation.
Oh, PowerPoint sucks the time up. I mean, what I always say to people, if it takes you longer than a half hour to put your slides together, your slides are too complex. Go back to the drawing board and start over.
I do a lot of other people's podcasts, like probably average 1 or 2 a week. If I had to make a PowerPoint presentation before them, there's no way. There's no way. I just got to show up and have a conversation with them in my mind. I don't like to have too much prepared. It's too rigid. Let's let it go wherever it goes.
Well, exactly. And you know, there have been a couple of problems that have occurred with PowerPoint. One we've talked about, which is critical thinking. But the amount of time it takes to do it versus the impact on the communication process just leaves me thinking, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? I went to Michigan before COVID with my cousin and a couple of friends of his to see Manchester United play Liverpool. My cousin is a big Liverpool fan, and I got a Manchester United jersey just to bug him. I digress, but it was fun. And we went to the big house to watch this. But before we went to lunch, and one of the guys was a vice president with Home Depot. And he was saying that, you know, Amazon is the thing. Like everybody's trying to catch Amazon. The whole retail sector is being completely upended and Amazon's responsible and we all want to be like Amazon. So I said, well, do you use PowerPoint at your management meetings and your board meetings? Oh yeah, I've got to use PowerPoint. Well, one of the things that sets Amazon apart, if you want to catch them, you have to make decisions like them and as effective as they make them. And the best way to do that is to separate the written word from the spoken word in order to make those effective decisions. Oh, can't do that. No, no, no. Well, now he's retired, and I saw him and my cousin and a bunch of friends downtown the first week of December last year, and he's like, that conversation resonated with me, and the more I started going to our meetings, the more upset I got because I know you're right, having had that conversation and then spent 4 or 5 years going to meetings.
Why do you think organizations feel they need PowerPoint? Like, especially the more professional it gets, it's like it's not an actual meeting or it's not an actual presentation if it doesn't have PowerPoint. What's with that?
Because that's the way everybody is doing it, because PowerPoint got marketed and took hold before anybody started to say, well, hang on, what's the research around this? And there wasn't any. The interesting thing about that is the research is absolutely unequivocally clear now. And this has been repeated at Purdue, Barcelona, and at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. If I have two audiences, and one of them I show my slides, and the other one I deliver exactly the same information verbally and don't show a single slide, and then I test each audience with a test on what I talked about, which audience scores higher?
The one with no slides.
How much higher?
Probably significantly.
Minimum of 25%.
So they retain 25% more information?
Yes.
That makes sense to me. You're not challenging yourself trying to do too many things at one time.
Exactly. And, I've gone to talk to groups I had a meeting with a bunch of academics at a college in the greater Toronto Hamilton area, which gives you a hint on where it was. And they're starting to put two screens into classrooms. Now you're going to have two sets of PowerPoint plus the lecturer.
How could that have any justification? What the heck?
Well, especially since they're all researchers in the room, and every one of them has done academic research that they want other people to believe they did the best. And yet, faced with the evidence that there's nothing that says it's better, they still ignored it. So they said, what do you think that's going to do to academic quality? So the best thing you can do for academic quality and effectiveness is take all the screens out of the rooms and have your lecturers talk to the students and answer their questions. Oh my God, you think I'd rain down upon the holy grail of academia, for crying out loud? And it just blows me away. I don't understand it.
One of the justifications I've heard come up, I've had this conversation with a few people behind the scenes before we did this recording here, unload my thoughts a little bit. Some of them suggested that, oh, well, the people today, kids and adults, they have such short attention spans because they're being hit with all these different forms of stimulus. So you got to keep them engaged in your presentation or they won't listen. Like they're implying that you need the slides in order to make them pay attention. And yet you're saying it's the exact opposite.
It's absolutely the exact opposite. If you want to engage people, engage their mind. Allow them to take your ideas to their long-term framework, find or create a place for that idea, and then come back to you. That's engagement. Trying to, it's like talking to the person who talks nonstop. I mean, most people don't walk around the office like this talking all day without giving people an opportunity to think about what they said, because we did talk about a principle. You can listen, you can think, but you can't listen and think at the same time. And there's another principle involved. People don't remember what you say and remember what they thought about what you said. So what do you have to do to give them an opportunity to think about your ideas?
I get it. That's too much.
Exactly. You have to pause to let them think about your ideas. And, they want more engagement. I have a question. I'm sorry. I've saved plenty of time at the end for questions. Will you please hold that question till the end? Wow. How many times have you been to a presentation and seen somebody do that? Now, if that person walks out of that room and whines about engagement, I just shake my head.
So I have maybe a somewhat related anecdote here. So you mentioned parties before. I am not good at parties. I will stress if I'm thinking about how to make small talk with people at a barbecue or something like that. So I actually read books on this, like how to get me out of this, how to be social without being social, I guess. I don't know. So
Do
in
you
this,
want to know the secret?
what is it?
Ask them about themselves.
I was going to say this is the advice that I found in books, and it was extremely useful. Just ask a
Ask
question.
them about themselves.
What do you do for a living? Oh yeah? How do you like it?
Where
Oh,
you
yeah?
from? How you been? And
Yeah.
don't talk about yourself.
And I end up not saying anything really, and they had a great time. They like me because I
They
like
love
them,
you.
or it looks
The
like I like
more,
them.
well, the more they talk, the more they like you. It's the most amazing thing.
Well, people's favorite subject is themselves, right? So just
Absolutely.
but the point is I see a big difference between the people where all I ask is, yeah, what do you do? And they just keep going on and on and on and on and on. And yet person just says, yeah, I'm in IT at this company down the road, and then stops, allows for another question. And even if I'm just asking the questions because I don't know what to do with the conversation, it's still, we end up getting quite a lot of information back and forth. And it's usually
Yeah.
that person I end up liking a lot more than the one that just kept going on and on,
Funny how that works, isn't it?
even if it was an interesting subject.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I had a business, as I said, I had a business partner. And first year we were together, we went to all the holiday parties trying to sell business. And I got a call from a client in the morning, said, "Oh, your business partner is fantastic." I look over and he's got his feet up on his desk, laying back, sleeping, not generating any money, having a good old nap. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. So I said to him, "How do you do it?" And he said, "Simple. I just ask people about themselves. I like people. I like learning about people. So the more I ask about themselves, the more they talk, and the more they talk, the more they like me, and the better we get along."
It's awesome, and they don't know anything about you, but sometimes they will. They'll be, they're flattered that you are asking about them, and then it's sort of common sense to ask a question about the other person now, and
Yeah,
now it's an easy conversation back and forth, ping pong.
exactly. Exactly. It's the simplest thing. It's so easy to work a room if you really know how.
One more anecdote before we get to the other steps. So when I was at the University of Sydney on Wednesdays, I believe, there was a room upstairs where everybody who was finishing their PhDs or just finished or masters or whatever it is, we have to put a presentation together. Of course, you have to put a presentation together for your sponsors, but they would practice on Wednesdays. So after school hours or whatever, we would all go upstairs, 6 o'clock, whatever it was, and it was just very interesting to me that most of those people I had had a conversation with about their work, and very clearly in 2, 3, 5 minutes, they were able to convey exactly what they did without any of the details. Because as you're talking about separating writing and verbal, I don't need those details right now. I'm happy to read your paper, the one that you published to do this presentation. Let me see the paper. I'd love to see it. Let me
Mhm.
see the graph in a printout before the presentation. Well, you say that's a bad thing because you don't want them reading during the presentation, but maybe,
Yeah, if they've absorbed it, typically sponsors will read it in advance, yes. So
yeah,
there
I
is a
like to
place
read it
for
in
that.
advance and I
Yeah,
get more from the presentation, but
exactly.
I could read it after too. So
Yeah,
there are some presentations that have information, like it's based on information, and I can understand why you think you need to have that information in the presentation, but now I believe because of you that you really don't. You could print that out and say, yeah, yeah, these are the graphs, this is what we collected. You can explain it and say, yeah, it's in the handout. You can study that data later if you want.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
And those same
Couldn't agree more.
people who could clearly, comfortably spit it out in 2 or 3 minutes, same thing. It's a 30-minute presentation for no reason, full of data that I'm not going to remember. Hold your questions till the end, useless details, stuttering and fiddling with the clicker to get to the next slide. There's always some kind of a mistake too, like the thing doesn't work or just something, there's always some trip up, some waste of time just in
Yeah,
even setting up the presentation. And, oh, I clicked too far. Oh, I got to click back and find my place. And now the presenter forgot what they were even talking about. It's very jagged instead of being free flowing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I lied to you.
but they're still doing it.
One more anecdote. A friend of mine at UCID, Daniel Harrison, who is now Dr. Harrison, he got to do a TED Talk at some point here, and the TED Talk was phenomenal. Well, it turns out they give you a lot of guidance, right? And you're supposed to practice it and get it as clean as you can get it. And so it's no wonder to me now watching pretty much any TED Talk that it's much easier to see. It's much easier to experience than a normal presentation. And funnily enough, I love Dan here, but his regular presentations, he didn't keep that up so much. It's just like all the attention was put into this one presentation, and it was very, very good. And we didn't carry those habits into the other presentations.
Well, and he should. I on an anecdote from my side, I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, best presentation I ever developed is when the projector didn't work. Oh,
Hmm.
really? So it was a good, oh yeah, it was awesome. Had a great So what have you done since? Oh, the projector's worked every time since. It's like, oh my God, please. Oh, oh, please. I mean, I I went to up to Huntsville to do a presentation to a group of urologists, and I Jules came up with me, my wife came up with me, and I woke up in the morning and I tried poking her, you want to get up and get some breakfast? She's like, go away, I'm sleeping in. The kids aren't here, leave me alone. So I got up, got dressed, went and had breakfast and watched the presentation that was on before I was supposed to do my presentation. And it was this urologist who was leading it was a group of urologists from around Canada who were then going to fan out and share the information that this person was sharing with them about certain treatment options and certain things to look for, and continuing medical education session for urologists.
So pretty
And it was
important talk.
well, I tell you what, there was he used one video, which was a laser procedure in a urethra that I could have gone my whole life without seeing, but
Wow.
was okay. And he just had a conversation, and he must have answered in an hour and 10 minutes, 100 questions minimum. Beautifully done. It was absolutely beautifully done. So then there's a break, and people are talking about the presentation. So I've made my way through the room to go to the washroom, and groups of people are talking about the presentation there. And then after the break, they're supposed to get together to put the finishing touches on their PowerPoint slides before they all fanned out across the country to deliver the same information. Well, needless to say, that took way longer than anybody could have imagined. So when they came back, I was supposed to have an hour and a half, and I ended up having 20 minutes before there was a hard break for lunch, and people were getting on buses to go back to Pearson Airport to go to their wherever it was they're from across the country. Couldn't go any past 12. So I thought to myself, these are all an intelligent group of people. And I said to them, do you remember the presentation this morning? They said, oh, yeah. And how was it? Oh, it was amazing. It was awesome. It was fantastic. How many slides did Dr. So-and-so use? And there was this dead pall of silence. Oh, a few, 10. And finally I said none. And I verified with the doctor, he was still in the room, that he didn't use a single slide, which they didn't even notice. And then I said to them, so you're putting the finish. Oh, we're not quite finished our PowerPoints. I said, wouldn't it be better for your audiences if you tried to do exactly what he did and let your fellow professionals be professionals and not be spoon-fed information through the use of PowerPoint? Oh my God, you'd think I'd have attacked the holy grail of urology, for crying out loud.
But these
They
same
argued with me.
doctors, they just viewed a great presentation without PowerPoints, but then they immediately started making their PowerPoint presentations about that content.
Exactly. And when I pointed it out to them, because I said, anybody here ever prescribed Viagra? Every hand, of course, in the place goes up. You do realize that a similar observation to the one I've just made, if it hadn't been made, Viagra wouldn't be the success that it is today. Because Viagra was originally a low blood for treating blood pressure. Did
I
you know
should have
that?
known that, but I didn't know that.
And so what they found was people were coming back saying, "Can I have some more of that?" And that's how they discovered Viagra's current use. But if somebody hadn't made that observation, it never would have happened. Well, that didn't tickle their fancies, and they all went back and delivered their presentations with PowerPoint.
So we've gone through put your audience first, and we've kind of touched on step two, structure the conversation. That's how you're actually creating the presentation itself. But you have your own framework here. So instead of just going on PowerPoint and creating your presentation that way, you do it more thoughtfully here in the step two. Do we need to explain any more of that? Should I point towards this presenter's toolbox that you sent me?
You can. I mean, the presenter's toolbox has all of the models. I guess the big thing about structuring the conversation is you should never use PowerPoint to develop your content. That's not why it was developed, and in that role, it's failed miserably. Use notes, but do not show your notes to the audience under any circumstances whatsoever.
Because
You
they're going to
need
read
notes to
them.
keep yourself on time and on track, but don't show those notes to your audience. They can be on your laptop in front of you. There's a whole bunch of ways I carry them with me on a piece of paper when I go up, but never show those notes to the audience. And for goodness sake, don't put them on a slide either to project or print.
Do you think there's any place for having simple slides? Like, you might be mad at me for this. So I read your book twice before I ever did my first real life PowerPoint presentation, and I had it in mind. Maybe I should have read it right before, but I did make a slideshow. It was about 8 slides. I've used it a few times, but there's almost no information on it. It's just a couple of words guides me to the next topic, but I could very easily have those notes in front of me. I don't think the audience is really gaining anything by having that up.
I doubt it that they are. I would agree with that. Yes.
So maybe in your best chance, it just does nothing.
If it could be wallpaper, sure, like a logo or the title slide, or I mean, you can use that. You can put it up. What a lot of people also don't know is you can walk over and hit the B key on your keyboard and it blanks the screen. So
That is good to know. Now, back to those academics, they do have some relevant graphs and stuff. Like, could you have the graph there and just quickly be like, hey, look, this went down, this went up, and then stop and let them look at it for a second and then move on?
yes, but I find it's better to pre preset their cognitive framework in advance before showing the visual. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a graph in a minute. It's going to show you um, this going down. It's going to show you this going up. The real part that you want to focus on is where those two lines intersect and what happens with those two lines at that intersection point, which is what we've been talking about so far.
And then take the visual away after they've looked at it
No,
for a
no,
second.
now you put the visual up
Okay.
and then you look at it yourself and absorb it and then watch them. And if they're all still looking at the visual, don't say a word. But once they start coming back, ask if there are any questions. If there aren't any questions, you might make one additional point on the visual, but as soon as you're done with it, bring it down and carry on the conversation.
I think I had one picture in my presentation, which is just a picture of the doctor that I'm there giving his message basically, like, hey, this is this guy. It's got his little
Mhm.
bullet points of his career. Even now I'm thinking that's too much and unnecessary.
Well, I would put the picture up and then I would explain the career as the bullet points, but without the bullet points there. So get
Okay.
rid of the writing and just, it's nice to have the credibility that this is the doctor or the person that you're doing this for or with.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, so it's part of a big anchor
Yeah,
for why the heck I'm here speaking about this.
exactly.
Okay, so step two, structure the conversation. And of course, you said conversation, not presentation. Step three, minimize the visual aids. I think we've gotten through that as well. Is there anything else you
Yeah.
think you got to add to that? I like this idea that visuals are a spice, right? They can enhance your meal, but you can very quickly overdo it.
Yeah. Well, there is no middle ground in this medium. If something doesn't add to the outcome you're seeking, it takes away from. So the more visuals you add, they're having an impact, and they're probably taking away from what it is you want to say. So if you don't need a visual, don't use a visual and carry on the conversation.
Fair enough. And a little bit back to the audience thing, that is obviously very, very important. I have been to, especially in the health business, I've been to quite a few presentations where it was obvious that almost everyone in the room was seasoned in this business. Like, this is not our first day here. And yet the presenter advances as if this is day one.
Mhm.
And everybody's eyes are like, oh my goodness, we already know all this stuff. You got to read the room and see that we need some more advanced material here. Or the opposite. And even for me, speaking to a small group of people in a church in Detroit, who are mostly elderly people, I'm just going to conduct the whole thing completely differently than a bunch of young yuppies in Denver, Colorado.
There may be, but again, if we go back to shared opinions, they may have similar opinions regardless of their age that predispose them to certain ways for you to communicate to influence them. So that's why analyzing audiences on the basis of shared opinions is incredibly important as well.
So how would you determine those shared opinions?
Well, go through the models that are in the presenter's toolbox. There's a whole series of questions to ask. And once you ask those questions, you'll pretty much have a good idea of what opinions your audience have. If you don't, then that's a place where you go out and do primary research.
And by the way, this presenter's toolbox and the 5 steps to conquer death by PowerPoint, all of these are on Amazon currently. And Eric, I just received your package this morning, so I have not read through the presenter's toolbox yet, or your latest book, One Bucket at a Time, which I'd love to hear a little bit about later.
Well, you've heard it because this bucket is working memory. It's itty bitty teeny tiny. See, it's already overloaded, right? So you have to listen, find a place in your cognitive framework, and come back. And that's basically what that book is about. How to feed into the way people listen.
Well, and you've got to repeat things in order to learn them, right? I get frustrated in talks when there is something new, and now I've got to spend time thinking about it and repeating it to myself, or I'm not going to remember it. And
Exactly.
even when I'm reading books, I read a lot of nutrition books, but I'm specifically only trying to remember the nutritional points. And then once I've absorbed, it took me a long time to understand what each of the vitamins do. Like, there's a lot of nutrients out there. So I would ignore a lot of other stuff, other compounds that I wasn't trying to remember, and just
Yeah,
had to return to it later. And I do think a lot of stuff is just given too fast, especially in video format. Not enough time for you to digest it and repeat it. One bucket at a
exactly.
time. You can only handle one bucket at a time.
Exactly. But the one thing about video though is you can always go back. Presentations you can't.
And that is something I find myself doing a lot with videos, and it is annoying. I do have the time and the ability to rewind, but I think if you were really presenting something profound, rather than just trying to beat the algorithm and fit everything into a 5-minute video, I could personally use you repeating it, the important points, summarize it.
Mhm.
You've explained the point. I'm getting it. I'm thinking about it, but you can't just move on to the next thing or it's gone.
Exactly. And one way to do that is at the end of each point, ask if there are any questions, and then keep your answers short.
So that's actually step 5. We're skipping
Mhm.
step 4. We'll go back to step 4. So step 5 is answer questions throughout. And you've got this
Yes.
thing called the 10 push-up rule. What's that about?
Yeah. So one of the problems with questions is that people think they know where the question is going. So they stop listening halfway through and start engaging their working memory and their long-term memory and stop listening. Another problem is answers that are so long, I want to shoot myself before the end of the answer because goodness gracious me, I just wanted a yes or no and I'm going to be here all weekend. So I came up with the 10 push-up rule. And the 10 push-up rule, when it's evoked, says you get a maximum of 10 words with which to answer any question you're asked. Every word over 10, you will do 10 push-ups per word at the end
Kind of
of your
like your
presentation.
son has to walk all the way upstairs to turn off the light. when there's a consequence to you going over your words, people stick to it?
Exactly. Oh, first thing that happens is they listen to the question. I mean, the most striking example, and I talked about this on Tuesday night with a couple of the people who have the technology ideas. So there was a meet and greet after, and all the presenters kind of ended up talking to me, even though only one of them was my client. And I said to them, one of the one of the most striking examples I've seen of this was when I did media training with the city of Mississauga. And I had a dozen people for a half day. And I like to do lots of practice interviews, but in a half day with a dozen people, you can't do many. But I wanted to illustrate the value of short answers to questions and how it absolutely accelerates the communication process and makes it easy for people to understand. So at this session, I said, I need somebody to volunteer, and I need the person in this room who, when you go to a party and somebody asks you what you do for a living, you lie. And everybody's looking at each other like, what's he talking about? I said, well, I need the person in this room, that there are people in this room who have worked with that person for years and still don't understand what that person does. And everybody pointed to one person in the room, which was the risk manager for the city of Mississauga. And he's like, well, I can't believe this. So we cajoled him and he came up to sit down, and I turned on the camera, and I asked him about what he did. Well, he went on and on and on and on. His answers were a minute and a half, 2 minutes long. I got to ask maybe 3 or 4 questions, then I stopped the camera and I invoked the 10 push-up rule. And I told him that everybody in this room was going to make him do the push-ups if his answers were longer than 10 words. So I started the camera again. I asked him questions. First thing that happened was he listened to the whole question and then paused. What a beautiful thing, because now you can think, you can examine the question, you can find the best answer. All of those, thinking before talking, is such a beautiful thing. And he gave me succinct answers. And I only interviewed him for 3 or 4 minutes. And he must have answered, I'm going to guess, 20, 30, 40 questions, somewhere in there. I stopped the camera, thanked him, encouraged him to go back to his seat, and he grumbled all the way back. Oh, it's terrible. Blah, blah, blah. Everybody in the room is like this, stunned. Their eyes were open, their mouths were open. He goes and he sits down. The person beside him turns to him and smiles and says, how long have we been friends? I don't know, 5, 6 years. Do you realize that for the first time since I've met you, I now understand what you do for a living?
Because of the second part where he only got 10 words.
Exactly. Where it was horrible for him, but perfect for everyone else.
Because he had to actually answer the question and then move on for another one.
Exactly. And I got to ask more questions to explore his information and make his information mine and ours as part of the group.
I think it also makes the listener or the person who asked the question, when you give a short answer, I think it makes them a lot more interested.
Everybody's more interested.
People ask what I
Everybody.
do for a living, and usually I just say Instagram. It's one word. It's a one-word answer. And it by no means sums up what I do, but it's a very interesting answer, and it almost always provokes more questions.
Exactly. More engagement, which leads to more understanding, which leads to a better exchange, which leads to more efficiency. All of these things we know, yet you go to your next presentation and somebody's going to stand up at the front of the room and say, I've saved plenty of time at the end for questions. Please hold your, well, okay. No, I just can't wait to get out of here. Have a nice day.
So if the point is to engage with the audience, because that's ultimately what this whole thing boils down to, that people are not showing up to hear you drone on about anything, even if it is the most important thing they are interested in. The point is to engage with the audience, and the way to do that fundamentally is to exchange questions and answers.
Exactly. And another thing that's amazing is you're going to leave this discussion and you're going to go to your next presentation and you're going to see as soon as that slide starts, a cloud comes in front of people's eyes. We're all now conditioned to sit down, shut up, and be good people till it all ends. Which,
Which nobody wants to do that.
well, maybe some do, but I certainly don't.
Even when I watch a movie or something, I'm bad. I'm talking, I'm pointing things out. If I watch sports, I'd be one of those guys yelling at the TV. I don't want to just passively absorb a video or something.
Yeah, I'm giggling because my wife talks a lot during movies, and it's a family issue. If
I
you,
get it,
if you ever
but
talk to
it's
Chrissy
so
again,
boring.
she'll have some.
You got to be the best filmmaker in the world to keep my attention, and I don't think it's a problem with our attention spans.
Exactly.
So you said something I think very, very important. Let them finish their question, especially for those of us who are married. I'm talking about men married to women here. You probably know this. You better let your wife finish her sentence. You better not go in and finish her sentence for her or answer the question before it has been fully asked because it's probably not the question that you think it is.
Well, and I said to, and I've already gotten an email back from him, the CEO I worked with, he lives in Victoria, and he went home on Wednesday. And Tuesday night I met him because I went to the presentation. I was brought in by one of his board members, who's been a client of mine for many, many, many years. And I said to him, your spouse is going to love me. He said, why? Because I'm going to teach you how to let her ask the full question before you give the answer. He said, I interrupt people? I said, yeah. You interrupted the angel investors when they were asking a question. I can only
Oh
imagine
no.
what you do with your spouse. He said, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. It happens.
And you've also got a piece of advice which I've seen in other books as well, and I think is very useful. And it's these things are hard to implement, by the way. We have the natural urge to just speak and fill up the time and fill up the dead space, right? Even the word dead space, it implies that it's a bad thing. But
Yeah.
you recommend pausing after somebody asks a question. Even if you know the answer, just pause. Give a little one, two, three in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't really become a one, two, three. It becomes a habit that you double check to make sure you know the question. If you don't know or you don't understand, ask for clarification always. And then to focus on matching the answer to that question at that moment in time. And that's when the question and answer process works. And once you start doing that, you don't have to count to three. It just becomes natural.
I'm lucky on Instagram that I'll put the story question up a day before I do the answer. And if I'm smart, if I'm not too busy or something, I like to see them the night before. So I put it up, say 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and within a few hours, there's a bunch of questions there. So before I go to bed, before I finish the day, I can look at the questions. And I'm thinking about those questions literally all night, all through the next morning. Any spare mind time that I have, I'm thinking about the questions that I have to answer later. I'm just saying, I think that's actually a huge, huge blessing because I can check, I can even message the person, hey, what did you mean by that question? Just to
Yeah.
make sure I can formulate the proper answer. And I think my answers have gotten a lot better over the years, especially by focusing so much attention on them and thinking about them, not just for a few seconds, but in many cases for several hours.
Yeah. And you're very enlightened because for most of us, the longer we examine a question, the answer gets longer, not shorter. So I've worked in the PR industry for 40 years, and I've seen people look at a question and have 12 paragraphs of answer. And that's one of the dangers, but it really sounds like you're on the enlightened path.
Well, they used to only give us 15 seconds on the story. Now
Yeah.
they've increased it to a minute, and I actually found it very hard to adjust. It took a lot of practice to get down and be able to spit out an answer, especially a pretty complicated nutritional answer, biological answer in
Yeah.
15 seconds. And most of the time I couldn't do it. I would have to use a few slides to do it, but still, you see this little clock ticking down. You better have a succinct answer. I got pretty good at it like that. But then as soon as they expanded it to a minute, I found myself droning on and rambling a lot more. Had to reel myself in.
Yeah. Yeah. It's less is more always.
And a lot of people can't do the 15-second. They've tried and they fail.
Yeah. No, I know somebody who has had difficulty with that.
And the more you know, the more you think you need to put in. Like this again, health, it's such a huge subject that if I get invited on to somebody else's podcast, I do try to make it as much of an exchange as possible, but I know I'm trying to communicate the groundwork for a fairly complicated message. It almost always takes me 2 hours. Any
Yeah.
introductory, this audience has never heard this before. If the guy will let me speak for 2 hours, then I will do it. I can very easily fill it up. And even then, I'm still always thinking, oh, I should have mentioned that. I left this out, and oh, the way I explained that wasn't that good. But you've said this a few times. People really don't remember the details very well. They remember what they thought about you and how you made them feel, basically, right?
Well, what they thought about you, how you made them feel, but what they don't remember what you say, they remember what they thought about what you said. And that's why, this is always an imprecise medium. It does not have the precision of writing. You can be very precise when you write, but it's not necessary to be as precise when you speak. Words matter and the right words are important. I get all that. But at the end of the day, if it takes you 10 seconds to find the right word, nobody's going to give you a hard time down the road.
They're just such different mediums. I don't think this is appreciated. I'm a big book reader. I love books, and I do audiobooks. I used to do them more when I had to commute and stuff. I had more time to listen. But if it was a good audio, I almost always had to buy the book to really understand it. It's like the audio is more of a general thing to fill you in, but there's nothing that compares to a
Yeah,
book
and when you're
for
listening to an
details.
audio book, your mind might drift for a while. I did my degree right around the time I turned 50. I finished my degree. I always promised the kids I'd finish before them, and fortunately, Andrew was on the 5-year plan at the University of Western Ontario.
Ah,
And one of the communication theory courses I took, they talked about the two media, which are literacy, the written word, and orality, the spoken word. And the differences between them, the strengths and weaknesses of each. So when you're writing, you can be very precise. You codify something. It can be there 100, 1,000, 10,000 years from now. You can add levels of knowledge, layer upon layer, and that's all the written word. The spoken word is for sharing ideas in a relatively quick and efficient manner if it's done properly. So, how many times have you ever had a conversation with somebody via text or email that was going nowhere, and you picked up the phone and you settled the problem in 30 seconds? And that
constant.
demonstrates the strength of the spoken word. The problem is when you bring the two together, you cripple their strengths. You can't understand what the written word is saying if you're trying to listen to the spoken word, and vice versa. And that's one of the reasons why I'm absolutely adamant that the written and spoken word have to be separated to be most effective. Each has its strengths, each has its weaknesses, and each has a place. But the place they don't have is together.
Yeah, they're just fundamentally different.
Exactly.
Audiobooks have their place. Obviously, podcasts have their place. I believe in it, but it's hard to even compare it to the written word because they're just completely different things.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, fair enough. Okay, step 4, convey your message and personality. How do we do that?
Well, when does each of us convey our message and our personality every day of our lives? What are we engaged in? What are we having?
Conversations.
So my fundamental premise is relaxed conversation is your best style. So there are some principles around relaxed conversation. Uh, Number one, be yourself. How you stand, how you hold your hands, how you use your hands is part of your personality. For me to try to impose rules around that on you is a waste of time.
So that's even if you've got quote unquote the wrong body language.
There are certain parts of your anatomy you don't want to scratch or pick at when you're in front of a group of people.
Yep.
But I've seen people, in fact, I was doing presentation training with a vice president and his sales managers, and the vice president delivered a presentation and during the presentation reached into his ear, got some wax and flicked it. His presentation was so engaging that none of us even noticed until we watched the playback on the big screen. And then we all went, oh my goodness. But we hadn't even noticed. You want to talk about a forgiving medium. Now, he said, look, a couple things about that. Number one, based on what you're telling me, it's not an unusual thing for me to do to pick wax out of my ear, but it's something I want to stop. And if you want to stop something, you stop it, knock yourself out. Picking wax out of your ear is one thing you probably want to stop. But the other aspect is that he was so engaging that we didn't even notice what his body language was. And you know, you have a partner.
Yes.
What does your partner do with their hands when they talk to you?
All kinds of things, I guess. It would be hard for me
But
to
you don't
notice.
really know. Now you're going to leave here and go and watch and go, holy crap, I had no idea.
I might not notice if she painted the living room, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I'm in that one to say what I learned to do was I'd watch Julie and she'd be looking at a part of the house and she'd have this look on her face and then I would memorize every part of the house. And every time I looked over to that part of the house, I'd look to see what changed. So that was my secret for getting through that one. I don't know if it worked with you, but it worked for me.
So we're having a relaxed conversation right now, and it's been pretty easy to me, and it's been kind of a back and forth. You say in this book that at least half the time should be reserved for question and answers, or in other words, half the time reserved for the audience. And you recommend putting those questions throughout. Don't just speak for 15 minutes and then do 15 minutes of Q&A.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I recommend. And a Q ratio, which is, you know, if you have a 60-minute time frame, I would really encourage you to try to generate 60 questions from your audience.
And that's even if you're speaking for 30 minutes.
That's correct.
That's
If I
interesting.
if I can get from do you drink coffee to what would you have studied at university in 8 questions in 45 seconds, there's no reason why you can't answer 50 questions or 60 questions in an hour time frame.
Oh yeah, we've demonstrated that. Yeah, back to Instagram, they give me 100 slide limit per day, so I'm theoretically stuck at 100 questions, but that's still a lot, and it would be a lot less if I gave a lecture first. Probably would hardly be any. I've been to many, many lectures where it was long, it was informative, for better or worse, it was what it was, and there was supposed to be half an hour at the end for questions, but oops, we only got 10 minutes left, or it just goes on for another 2 hours. Like if it's we don't have to leave the building, you realize how many questions people have and how they'll stick around for the questions. That's what they're really there for most of the time. And so I'm
Exactly.
wondering, did that lecture need to be 2 hours? Probably
No,
not.
oh, I really don't see any talking for 2 hours. It's crazy.
Write a book and say you can buy the book at the end. It's on the table back there in the back of the room, and that's all the information. Give them an
Exactly. Or
introduction.
send me an email and I'll send you more information.
Yeah, fair. In our business, we have no shortage of information. It's quite hard to leave information out. I struggle with it too. I struggle with
Uh,
not over answering questions.
no, it's very hard. It's one of the most difficult things to do is answer questions effectively.
So this might be one of the main takeaways for anybody. First of all, if you're sweating about speaking publicly or getting on a podcast or something, just be relaxed. Realize it's about communicating to the audience. It's not about you, how you sound and how you look within reason, as long as you're not way out of line, basically. And stop talking when you're done.
Funny how that works. But the hardest thing to do is answer a question and stop talking. It's mind-boggling.
So I had a question here because your book and most of our conversation here is about presenting basically live. Which of these principles still apply to something like a podcast? And I wrote down lectures here, but I think I kind of realized that a lecture and a presentation are basically the same thing. So you're saying that even like a university professor, if they have an hour-long class, they should only be speaking for 30 minutes. They should be inviting questions all the way through anytime.
Well, why else is the professor there? I can read all the stuff. When I read and I don't understand, don't I want to just go and ask a question, or are you going to go and read the same stuff to me that I read already?
To be
Which is the
honest,
crazy part.
to me, that is the main reason to have somebody who knows what they're doing. Yeah, for
Yeah,
me, I'll read it. Like whatever the assignment is, I'll read it and then I go to class and I just have a couple of questions.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, Andrew, his first year at Western, was doing calculus, and every Friday, every second Friday, they had a 2 hour question and answer. The professor instituted a 2 hour question and answer. So he comes home for um, Thanksgiving, and I say, how's the question and answer session going in calculus? And he looked real uncomfortable, and I could tell that he wasn't going anymore. So I asked him about it. He went to one, and the professor answered 4 questions in 2 hours. So each answer was a half hour long.
And
And
you're
that was the only
saying
one he went to.
you should have, you call this the Q ratio, the question ratio, which is
Yep.
quite simple. It's explained in the book. But it's like if you have 15 minutes to speak, so first of all, half of that should be you speaking, half should be question answer. So
Your
within
content
that's
should not be any longer than 7 minutes in length. Yes.
so your remaining 7.5 minutes, you should be able to get at least 15 questions answered.
Yes. Absolutely.
And at the pace we were going before with the coffee and university question, you could easily get there.
Oh, you get there in less than 2 minutes.
I'm going to try this on the next Instagram story, try to answer everything in less than 10 words. I know it's hard, but
Oh, it'd kill you.
well, sometimes I do this anyways, actually, because we get so many questions that I can't physically answer them all anyways. And
Yeah.
on a normal day, it takes me about an hour or 2 hours just to get through the questions until I'm done or my phone's dead or something. I rarely ever get to all the questions. So sometimes I'm like, okay, it's been a while. I've been droning on about a few things because sometimes I'll get a question. I'll take the opportunity to speak for 10 minutes on it and try and really flesh out this one thing. And then just to switch it up, I'll try and answer as many questions as I can that one day. And it usually turns out that the feedback from that day is much better, even though in my head, I conveyed a lot less information. I didn't really explain any of those things satisfactorily to me, but yet the audience got a lot more out of it.
Well, and if they get the opportunity to ask more questions, then they'll ask for more clarification, and they'll dive into your information at a pace and a place that is absolutely appropriate for their understanding, which you can never predict in advance.
No, and it's been interesting to me that we're going on 5 years now that I've been doing this on Instagram, and the questions just keep coming. It never stops. And many people say it is their favorite part of our account. They look forward to it. And I'm not trying to brag here. There's been some people, several people who say the only reason I'm on Instagram is for you, so I can watch those
Cool.
questionnaires. And
That's awesome.
I've struggled keeping it relevant, sort of in my head struggled. Like, are people going to get bored of hearing the same questions over and over? But apparently not.
Funny
It's a
how that works.
yeah, it's a
They're
crazy
all they're
thing.
all exploring, and they're all learning, and they're all, you're reinforcing things you talked about earlier.
So what about podcasts? Like people are expecting to tune in and hear me talk. A lot of times I have a guest, but sometimes it's just me for an
Yeah.
hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Which of these rules do I need to know for giving long form one way talks? Because this whole book is about two way and about how to make it more two way. So, what about the truly one way styles, formats?
Um, you still have to emulate conversation, which means that if you've gone 20 words and you haven't paused, you better start thinking about pausing right now, because that's the upper limit of the bucket. And if you listen to a good talk show, and we talked about when I worked at radio, I produced a talk show. It's one of my first jobs. And we had a guy, his name was Gord Whitehead. He still lives in Edmonton. that individual, he could talk for an hour and a half and be the most interesting human you've ever seen. Last time I saw Gord Whitehead talk was probably 15 years ago. I was in Edmonton and I was down in the gym in the morning doing my elliptical at the hotel I was staying at. And the TV was on. It just happened to be the cable station, which actually projected his morning show on 6:30 CHED. And he was talking, and I thought to myself, no wonder I was so enamored with him when we worked together. He's just so good at carrying on a conversation and allowing us the time to absorb his ideas so that we join him on his journey. And it's just simply feeding into how people listen. We can't listen to a nonstop stream of information. So you have to give them an opportunity to absorb your ideas as you go along.
So don't be scared about people getting bored and leaving if there's one 3-second pause.
Well, there better be lots of 3-second pauses or people will get bored and they will leave.
This has actually been my main complaint with our editing, including myself. All of us, there's 4 people that help plus me. We're all amateurs because we don't get paid for the content. There's not enough money to pay a real editor. We get paid on sales commissions. So yeah, we need content to get people to come to us and be interested in the sales proposition, but we just don't get paid for the actual content itself. Which, by the way, you can support this podcast directly through Patreon, patreon.com/therealnotus. All of the podcast episodes are posted there at least 1 week early and sometimes several weeks early. Usually I mention this at the beginning of the podcast, but we just kind of jumped in. So you can support us directly that way. We do appreciate it. There's some extra content there as well. Videos that have been pulled down from YouTube. Our weekly Zoom meetings, which we do go quite deep in, which are also, we try to structure them as a conversation, not just me droning on for an hour and a half. There's a lot of stuff on Patreon. You can get it there and you can support us that way. But yeah, my point is we're all amateurs that actually edit this. So the biggest problem with the editing, even my editing, has been cutting it too tight, not leaving enough breathing room. And you are very good at leaving the breathing room. So I hope whoever's editing this does not remove those. And in this case, it's a video, so I will probably be editing it and I will leave more space. I've had to leave more and more and more space, right? Editing and speaking are completely different skills. So I think I've gotten better at speaking, but not so much at editing. And yeah, anyone who tries their hand the first time, I get the episode back and it's way too tight. There's just no breathing room at all.
Yeah. Yeah. But that breathing room is important. It allows people to move information from short-term working memory, which is the common expression, to their cognitive framework, their long-term memory. And it has to make it the cognitive framework or it will never be remembered.
How else could you structure a one-way broadcast to resemble a conversation? Like that radio presenter you were talking about, what was his secret?
I don't know exactly what Gord's secret was, but I do know that in watching him, it was almost as if you're sitting across the table from him. So he's obviously imagining he's sitting across the table from somebody. And he's in his own mind emulated that conversation to the point that he can see them puzzling through an idea and waiting or nodding and saying, please give me the next piece of information.
Do you think it's important for you to pose your own questions? Like since there is no audience there, like and you mentioned earlier, you don't want to anticipate an audience's question, but in this case, should you?
You can. Another thing you can do is you can, in the previous week's segment, say, this is what I'm going to be talking about, and gather questions in advance, and then bring those to the conversation, ask them yourself, pause, and then answer them.
I like that.
Yeah, I've seen that done with, and I've encouraged people to do that with online training. Works very, very well.
It's also another way to engage with your audience. Hey, I'm making a video about this. What would you guys like to know?
Exactly. What's important to you? And send me any question you have. I'll try to answer it. I did work with Royal Trust many, many years ago, and one of the people who was with Royal Trust was a phenomenal presenter. His name was Stan. Stan was exceptionally effective at getting people into the branches for additional business. So they sent him to one of my sessions, and it turns out that what Stan did, he would walk into a branch, they were doing a session on estate planning, and he'd say, I know you folks have all kinds of questions around estate planning. What I want to do is I'm going to write down your questions on this flip chart. Any question you have. No, there's no question too big, no question too small. There's no such thing as a foolish or stupid question. So he would write down sometimes pages on the flip chart. Then he would go through his presentation, which was always very short, very succinct, and very similar to what he'd done previously. And at the end would go and draw lines through all of the questions that the audience asked. The ones that he covered in his content, he would just, everybody understand that I answered this question? Yeah, okay. Any more questions about, no, okay. Now this question I didn't touch on, but here's your answer, and would give a very succinct answer and say, is that an answer? Do you have any more questions about it? And they would ask more questions, he would answer them, then he'd draw a line through. Phenomenally successful. And I've used that many times over the years of my work.
I like that. I like that. I feel it's helped me a lot that our primary thing is Instagram because I'm not allowed to be in my own head very much, just because we're constantly hearing from other people. We get feedback on everything we do. We have so many questions that I could always just pull from the bank that we've got there. There's just so much. But yeah, it's
Exactly.
ingrained in my head what the common concerns of people are and what they really want to know about a subject and how to kind of cut to the point when it's needed. Yesterday, for example, I was talking with a customer. He has very serious health problems, but he has a very simple, to me, like three things he needs to do to fix it, in my opinion. And at one point in the conversation, he's talking about different foods, and I had to be like, look, this isn't important. This is frankly not important. There's only two or three things that I wanted to really get through to him on the call in order for him to get started. And there's endless hours of information beyond that. I could easily have talked for hours and hours and hours about Parkinson's and the other symptoms that he had, but I hardly gave any biochemical explanations at all. I just tried to convey, and I'm not perfect by any means, but I think I've gotten quite good at getting to the point, realizing when we've strayed away from the point, they're worried about something that's not important now. Let's steer it back to what's important and
Yeah,
get you to take action, which is the point.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, this medium is crazy. Less is more. The less you say, the more they understand and retain, period.
Fantastic. I hope we've got time for one more short anecdote about this concept of it's not what you say, it's what people think about what you said in their own words, in their own mind, in their own voice, in their head,
Yeah.
and in how they feel from you speaking. Most of the time that I've ever spoken, if it's not on video, I don't really remember what I said. And I find most of the time people don't really remember it either. We
Mhm.
use presentations a lot in this business. We always have. But it didn't take long to realize that people would only retain two, maybe 3 points out of a whole lecture. Hour, 2 hour lecture, they would walk away remembering 2 or 3 points, and usually that was enough. So to me, we've hacked that with short form content because I just cut lectures up and post them. So just take the interesting points and post them. And so you see one video, you get 1 point. That's all that was
Yeah.
meant to be communicated. It's extremely effective. It repeats itself right after. I have a very love-hate relationship with Instagram, but this is the love part that it just drills in that 1 point. And if you really were interested in it, you're going to watch it again. Boom, you know that point. And it only took 2 minutes because the clip was only 1 minute. You watched it twice, we're good. Whereas people could sit through a whole 1 hour or 2 hour lecture. And for all these reasons, I think that we went through, they're sitting there thinking about that one thing that they heard, but the guy's still speaking. So they're not listening to the new points, even if they're the most profound points ever, the most interesting stuff ever, they're still trying to remember that 1 point from earlier. They're also trying to remember the question that they want answered later. And so, yeah, you get a 2 hour presentation, and yet they retained 45 seconds worth of information, basically.
Mhm. People don't remember what you say. They remember what they thought about what you said. And they can only think in silence, whether you give them that silence or they take it for themselves. So I've long believed now that success in this medium, which I call face-to-face communication, you can be really successful if you understand how to use silence to influence when people think and what they think about. And that's when communication works.
Probably the most important talk that I ever did contained no information at all. It was at my brother's funeral, actually.
Mm.
And unfortunately, everybody else who spoke that day, no disrespect to any of them if they're listening, we're friends and family still. All the other speeches sucked. They were terrible. They were all over the place. They were crying and stuttering, and I don't even know what they're trying to say. Even the pastor was boring. Couldn't remember it all, but I also just felt not much at all from it. Everybody's sad, obviously, but I'm not sure what exactly the purpose of a speech at a funeral is. It's not necessarily to lighten the mood, but it is just sort of to give maybe a color to the experience. And my point of this is that this was the most important speaking thing I've ever done, but I didn't sweat it. I think in part because I didn't have any notes at all. I don't have a plan. There's no action that you need to take afterwards. All I need to do is not be as bad as the speakers ahead of me and the ones that will follow. And everybody there told me that it was the best speech, one of the best speeches they ever heard. For the life of me, I can't remember what I said. And even that very night, we're all at a little get together. Nobody could tell me one word I said. Nobody could repeat back. Like they said, that was a really amazing speech. I felt so much from it, but they couldn't say one sentence that I said, just nothing, which I think is interesting because even if you screw things up well, maybe not if you screw things up, I don't know, as long as you make them feel good, as long as you make it feel like it didn't waste your time and I don't know. They should be walking away feeling good enough. I think you
Yeah,
had sort of
well,
you had a
yeah.
funeral story in the book, didn't you?
Well, I delivered the eulogy at my grandmother's funeral. And when I went to deliver that eulogy, I wanted to touch people in the room. So I wanted to have stories that would touch specific family members in the room. So I introduced myself as Eric with a C because I was named after her husband, my grandfather, who had a K, and my mother wanted me to have a C, and so that I would always be my own person. So I introduced myself as Eric with a C. Well, that was for her. I asked one of my uncles about what his favorite memory was, and he talked about coming home and smell to the farmhouse and smelling fresh baked bread. So I talked about that. You could almost see his siblings and other members of the family and other people in the audience just going like this. Oh, yeah. So, in terms of an objective for that, personality was important because I wanted people to feel good about her through me.
Mm,
And but message also worked because I wanted to really touch certain people who were important to the family and important to my life and important to other lives in ways that no other event could touch them. And one of my uncles who was there, I just delivered the eulogy at his wife's funeral in October. I'm the wedding and funeral guy in the family for some strange reason. And it was the same kind of thing, where you gather stories from the family and you want to touch, I made a special effort to touch the people on her side of the family because my uncle and Leona were together for 26 or 27 years. So there was still a family dynamic on this side, but I also wanted to include her part of the family. So I made a special effort to do that. And any presentation, if you look at it, I agree with you entirely. How you make them feel is important. That's part of the personality aspect. But when you can really make it sing is when you can bring the message and the personality together and make those two things intertwine. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to a group of angel investors, a group of potential uh, institutional investors, or you're talking to lawyers or accountants or family members or your staff. Message and personality, when they work together well, are the foundation on which success can be constructed.
And speaking at the funeral or wedding is probably the definition of it not being about you, right?
Better not be about you at that point. Nope.
You're just there to facilitate it. You're just a host.
Exactly. You're there to help others.
Come to think of it, it probably helped me that I didn't have that much to say. I know that sounds bad. My brother and I were not close or anything like that, but also it was just a flat out tragedy. He just dropped dead at 25. What do you want me to say? There isn't that much to say about it, to be honest. We can share a little bit about his life, and so I think the fact that I didn't have that much to work with was a big advantage. I didn't go up there and try and spew 20 different stories. And there were some people who did that. I think my dad, he's tried to go on like 20 different stories. Yeah, and like this, I don't know what even you're trying to say anymore.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, it's an emotional time. It's a very tough time for everybody. You know, it's, I mean, one day I'll tell you the full story of delivering Leona's eulogy in the hall of a Orthodox Ukrainian church and the weird stuff that was there. But I digress.
Story for another day.
It is.
Okay, so how do we sum this up? What do people need to do, even if they're not giving PowerPoint presentations?
Well, don't take communication for granted. Understand that communicating is incredibly important, as you outlined at the very start of this, incredibly important to any form of success. You can have the best idea in the world. If you can't communicate that idea to other people, it's useless. Recognize that if you're going to communicate strategically, you have to be focused on outcomes, not inputs. You know, key messages are important, but is the key message generating the behavioral outcome that you're seeking from this communication exchange? If it isn't, then you have to ask yourself why and probably adjust the input to get the outcome. Learn your audience, understand your audience. It's incredibly important to tailor your information to the needs of those who will be receiving it. Structure a conversation. Don't use PowerPoint to develop your content. It doesn't work, never has, and it never will. Find other ways to do it. Minimize visual aids. You know, the world has gone PowerPoint crazy. I mean, I've been around for over 40 years, since before PowerPoint was developed, which it was just developed 2 years before you were born. And it hasn't made the world any better. I can assure you of that. If you want to communicate effectively, you have to separate the written word from the spoken word, and then have a conversation with people and ask and answer their questions. If you can do those things, you can communicate effectively and you can be more successful than the alternative.
It's interesting that on the audio versions of these podcasts, almost everyone will listen to the entire thing, even if it's 2, 3, 4, 5 hours long. So that to me is just absolute proof that you don't need any visuals at all to keep somebody engaged.
In fact, counterintuitively, the more visuals you have, the less engaged they will become.
Very interesting. So everybody, you should know this. Yes, you have to communicate effectively. In the business I'm in, I know all kinds of people who give the message constantly. They're very knowledgeable, very passionate, and they don't sell anyone. Well, if the person doesn't take action, then what have you really accomplished? Oh, well, I told them. Well, did you? Did you let them ask questions? Did you let them finish their question, or did you start talking over them as soon as they answered it? Maybe they probably didn't like that. And that's probably now what they're thinking about. Oh, I don't like how that guy cut me off. Yeah, that was my question, but I didn't like that. Made me feel weird, and now they're not listening to you at all. And yeah, you can verbally vomit all over a lot of people and not make any sales at all. And yet the person who goes in and keeps it simple, they don't know all the information. They're not an expert. They're not trying to be an expert. They're not trying to convince you of how insulin resistance is reversed or anything like that. Like none of those technical details at all. They might just give you the gist, give you a proposition. If you do this, then you should expect this. Stop talking. Let them ask more questions. There's a phrase in sales that if they're talking, they're buying. I know it sounds kind of mean, but if they're talking to you, they're probably going to buy something. And if you let them talk, that's way more important than you getting your point out, showing how knowledgeable you are. No one truly cares. If they're interested in the information, they will find the time to absorb all of that information, or they will ask you more and more questions.
And there's no better expression of engagement than 20, 30, 50, or 100 questions.
Absolutely. That is by definition or by default your most engaged prospect, for sure.
Exactly.
I agree. Say as much as is needed, and that is it. And if you got a lot to say, write a book.
There you go. This was awesome. Thanks for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, I very much appreciate you coming on. And this 2 hours flew by. So I just want to remind everybody that one of our key points here is that the written word and the spoken word are two completely different things. If you think you got value from this conversation, I promise you, you're going to get more value from reading the actual book, Death by PowerPoint, 5 Steps to Conquer. Watch out, because there actually is another book called Death by PowerPoint. It's by somebody else. So you definitely want the 5 Steps to Conquer by Eric Bergman. And very soon, I'm going to read this next book, one bucket at a time, which looks good. I'm interested. I will do a book review of that on my Instagram. If you didn't know, I do tons of book reviews. You can find them on my Instagram and on my website, notusbooks.org. And of course, you can just find all the channel links, all the Instagrams and YouTubes and all that is on notusbooks.org. And there you can also find the books that I've written and the ones that I've helped publish. You can find the free audiobook versions of my books, and you can find an archive of this podcast on notusbooks.org. You can download the episodes there for free. And actually, if you listen to the archive version, there's a special treat all the way at the end for you. So those of you who are listening on the archive right now, stick around after we sign out. And remember that the 5 Steps to Conquer actually comes with a follow-up, the Presenter's Toolbox. I also just received this morning, but I know Eric is good at what he does, and I expect this to be valuable as well. I will update you about that on my book reviews.
Great. Thanks so much, man. It was awesome. Awesome seeing you again. It's nice to see you're doing well. It was when Chrissy said, "Oh, do you know so-and-so?" I said, the name's familiar. And then I heard your voice and that was it. Okay, yeah, I know who that is.
Great.
Because she played your podcast, so it was pretty cool.
Very, very happy to reconnect with you. And maybe we could do another one when I finish this book, one bucket at a time.
Well, I'm actually doing a book called Every Kid's a Millionaire. I'm hoping to have it done this year, so I'll send you a copy when it's done.
Amazing.
All right, Ryan, thanks so much, man.
Mr. Eric Bergman, thank you as well. Thank everybody for being here. Until next time.
Ciao.